Daniel stood there, beside the fountain long after Lily's small hand had slipped into Emma's again. The evening air moved gently through the trees, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Car horns, laughter, the quiet rhythm of life continuing in every direction. For years, Daniel Hartwell had believed that success was something you built brick by brick until it surrounded you like a fortress. Power, money, all the things people admired, all the things people chased. Yet somehow, standing there, with a few yellow flowers in his hand and the echo of a child's voice in his mind, those achievements suddenly felt quieter than they ever had before. Lily walked a few steps ahead of them, from one stone to another along the edge of the fountain. Every jump was a small victory, every wobble followed by a proud smile. Emma watched her carefully, the same way she always did, ready to step forward if Lily lost her balance. Daniel noticed the habit immediately. It was the watchfulness of someone who had carried responsibility alone for a long time. You know, Emma said softly after a moment, she used to do that with her father too. Daniel turned slightly, the fountain stones. Emma nodded. He used to pretend the ground was lava. She'd laugh so hard she couldn't even jump straight. There was no bitterness in her voice, but there was a quiet weight behind the memory. Daniel didn't ask what had happened to the man. Some questions didn't need to be forced into the open. Life had already given enough clues. Lily reached the final stone and raised both arms triumphantly. "I did it!" Daniel clapped slowly, smiling. Impressive balance. Lily ran back toward them with her usual unstoppable energy. "Did you see that, Daddy?" The word came naturally now. No hesitation, no question. Daniel felt Emma glance at him briefly, measuring his reaction. But he didn't correct Lily. He never had. "Yes," said calmly. "I saw." They began walking again along the park path, leaves crunching softly beneath their steps. The sun was starting to dip behind the tall buildings beyond the trees, turning the sky into shades of gold and pale orange. Emma finally spoke again. "You know she tells everyone about you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Everyone? Her teacher? The neighbors? The lady at the grocery store?" Emma said with a small smile. "Apparently you're the tallest dad in the city." Daniel laughed quietly. "I'll try to live up to the reputation." Lily tugged on his sleeve again. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Shook her head immediately. "It's almost dinner time." "But..." Daniel leaned slightly toward Lily and whispered, "What if we get it after dinner?" Her eyes widened, as if he had just revealed a secret treasure. "Really?" Emma sighed. There was amusement in her expression. "You're definitely spoiling her." Daniel shrugged lightly. "I'm negotiating." They reached the street corner near Emma's apartment building. The neighborhood was modest, lined with small stores and narrow sidewalks. Nothing about it resembled the towering financial district where Daniel spent most of his days. And yet, somehow, it felt warmer. Inside the apartment, Lily kicked off her shoes and ran straight to the kitchen table where her crayons were scattered from earlier. "Can we draw again?" she asked. Daniel sat beside her while Emma began preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and vegetables filled the small kitchen. "What should we draw?" Daniel asked. "A castle," Lily said immediately, "with a dragon." Daniel picked up a blue crayon. "Every castle needs a dragon." Emma watched them from the stove. The sight felt strangely natural, as if Daniel had always been part of the room, but life had taught her to be cautious with moments that looked perfect. "Daniel," she said after a while. "Yes." "You know this attention from the media isn't going away." He nodded slowly. "I expected that. They'll keep watching, asking questions." Daniel continued coloring the castle walls carefully. "Let them." Emma studied him. "It could affect your company." "Maybe. And you still don't mind." Daniel paused for a moment. Then He looked at Lily concentrating on her dragon, drawing with serious determination. "I've spent years protecting things that matter to investors," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time I protect something that matters to me." Emma didn't reply, but her expression softened. Later that evening, Lily sat between them on the couch watching cartoons, her head slowly leaning against Daniel's shoulder as sleep crept closer. Emma noticed it first. "She's falling asleep," she whispered. Daniel looked down carefully. Lily's small hand was still holding the crayon she had been using earlier. "She fought sleep all afternoon," Emma said with a quiet laugh. Daniel gently lifted Lily into his arms. The movement was awkward at first, but natural enough. Emma opened the bedroom door and pulled the blankets back. Daniel placed Lily down carefully. She stirred slightly. "Daddy," she murmured. "I'm here," he said softly. Within seconds, she was asleep again. Daniel stepped quietly out of the room and closed the door halfway. The apartment felt calm now, the kind of calm that came only after a long day had settled. Emma poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. "Thank you." They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. "You're very good with her," Emma said. Daniel shrugged lightly. "She makes it easy." Emma traced the rim of her cup thoughtfully. "Most people with your life wouldn't slow down like this." Daniel looked toward the hallway where Lily was sleeping. "Maybe most people haven't been given a reason to." Emma met his eyes. "Daniel, what happens if your board forces you to choose?" He didn't answer right away. Outside the window, the city lights flickered on one by one. Finally, he spoke. "Then they might learn something about me they didn't expect." Emma tilted her head slightly. "And what's that?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "That some things are worth more than an empire." The next morning, the headlines were even louder. Inside Hartwell Systems headquarters, the atmosphere felt tense. Rachel met Daniel at the elevator again. "The board scheduled another meeting," she said carefully. Daniel nodded. "I assumed they would." As he walked through the glass hallway toward the conference room, employees quietly stepped aside. Some greeted him with polite smiles, but others whispered behind computer screens. News spreads fast in powerful places. Inside the conference room, Benson and the other board members were already waiting. "Daniel," Benson began immediately, "this situation is escalating." Daniel took his usual seat at the head of the table. "Meaning?" "More photos," another executive said, sliding a tablet toward him. Images showed Daniel leaving the park with Lily and Emma the night before. "Investors are asking if you're planning to step down," Benson said. Daniel looked up calmly. "I'm not." "Then you need to clarify your priorities." Daniel folded his hands on the table. "My priorities are the same as they've always been. Running this company." "Yes." Benson leaned forward. "Then prove it." Daniel held his gaze for a moment. "Very well." The meeting continued for nearly an hour. Strategies, numbers, projections. Daniel answered every question with the same steady confidence that had built Hartwell Systems into a global powerhouse. By the end, the room was quiet again. Benson finally nodded slowly. "You're still the best leader this company has." Daniel stood. "I know." As he left the building later that afternoon, Marcus opened the car door for him. "Back to the office tomorrow morning, sir?" Marcus asked. Daniel looked out the window toward the city skyline. "Actually." "Brookside Elementary," Daniel said. Marcus smiled slightly. "Yes, sir." And somewhere across the city, Lily was finishing another drawing with bright crayons, already planning what she would show him next. The next morning began quietly in a way Daniel had once believed impossible. Years ago, his mornings were controlled by alarms, schedules, and the relentless pressure of responsibility. Today, as the sun pushed its way through the tall glass windows of his penthouse, Daniel found himself standing at the kitchen counter, holding a simple cup of coffee, thinking about something far removed from business. He was thinking about Lily's dragon drawing. It still sat framed beside the first picture she had given him. Colorful pages that would look ordinary to anyone else, but to Daniel they felt strangely significant. They were proof of something new entering his life, something he hadn't planned, something he hadn't tried to build through strategy or effort. His phone buzzed on the counter. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Daniel answered. "Good morning." "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," Rachel replied. "I just wanted to confirm today's schedule." Daniel walked toward the window overlooking the city. Traffic was already beginning to fill the streets far below. "Go ahead." "You have a conference call with the London office at 9. The regulatory meeting at 11. The investor presentation this afternoon." Daniel listened quietly. "And?" he asked. Rachel hesitated slightly. "And Brookside Elementary at 3, I assume." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes. I've left that space open. Thank you, Rachel." There was a short pause before she spoke again. "You seem happier lately." Daniel considered that for a moment. "I think I might be." Rachel laughed softly. "Well, that's good for the company too." After the call ended, Daniel finished his coffee and prepared for the day. His suit was the same as always. Perfectly tailored, dark, professional. But something about the way he carried himself had changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make people notice. Inside Hartwell Systems headquarters, employees moved quickly between departments as usual. Screens displayed stock market updates. Conversations about contracts and mergers echoed through the halls. Daniel walked through the building with calm focus. He still belonged here. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the only place he belonged. The morning meetings passed smoothly. Numbers were reviewed. Decisions were made. Daniel's mind worked with its usual sharp precision. Yet every so often, he found himself glancing at the clock. 3 o'clock came sooner than expected. Marcus was already waiting outside the building. "Brookside Elementary, sir." "Yes." The drive across the city felt different now. Not because the route had changed, but because Daniel knew what waited at the end of it. When the car stopped near the school, Daniel stepped out and walked the familiar 2 blocks toward the entrance. The playground was alive with the noise of children finishing their day. Lily spotted him immediately.
"Daddy!"
She ran across the grass so quickly that Daniel had to step forward to catch her before she collided with him. "Hello, Lily. You came early," she said proudly. Daniel glanced at the clock tower near the school building. 3 minutes early, Emma approached behind her, carrying Lily's backpack again. "You're becoming very punctual," she said with a small smile. Daniel shrugged lightly. "I'm learning." They began walking down the sidewalk together. Lily held Daniel's hand, swinging their arms with exaggerated enthusiasm.
"We painted today," she announced.
"Did you?"
Daniel asked. "Yes, and I made something for you." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper covered in thick layers of paint. Daniel opened it carefully. This time the drawing showed a large tree with 3 figures standing beneath it. One had a crown again. Daniel looked at Lily. "I'm sensing a theme." Lily giggled. "You're still the king." Emma laughed quietly. "That's going straight to your office too, isn't it?" Daniel folded the paper gently. "Of course." They reached the small park nearby, where Lily immediately ran toward the swings. Emma and Daniel sat on the bench watching her. For a few moments neither of them spoke. Then Emma sighed softly. "You're making this look very easy." Daniel turned slightly. "Which part?" "Being here. Being involved." Daniel watched Lily pumping her legs to swing higher. "I don't think it's easy," he said. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you do it?" Daniel thought about that question carefully. Because some things are difficult in the right way. Emma considered that. You know, she said after a moment, Lily asked me something last night. Daniel glanced at her. What? She asked if you were staying forever. Daniel's expression remained calm, but his eyes shifted slightly. And what did you tell her? Emma looked toward the swings. I told her that sometimes people come into our lives unexpectedly. Daniel waited. And sometimes they stay. Daniel nodded slowly. That seems honest. Emma turned to him. Is it? Before Daniel could answer, Lily ran back toward them again.
Push me higher!
I believe that's my job. Emma watched him walk toward the swings. The way Lily trusted him completely was obvious in every movement. Children didn't hide their feelings. They didn't measure relationships with caution. They simply believed. Daniel pushed the swing gently. Lily laughed loudly.
Higher!
He pushed again. Careful, Emma called. I'm being careful. Lily's laughter filled the park. For Daniel, the sound felt more rewarding than any applause he had received in boardrooms or conferences. Eventually the sun began to set again. Emma stood and brushed grass from her coat. We should head home. Lily jumped off the swing reluctantly. Okay. As they walked back toward the apartment, Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Benson. Emma noticed the shift in his expression. You should take that. Daniel nodded and stepped a few feet away. Hello, Benson's voice came through immediately. Daniel, we need to talk. I'm listening. The investors are becoming nervous. Daniel sighed quietly. I expected that. This situation with the child and her mother is attracting too much attention. Daniel looked across the street at Lily holding Emma's hand. What exactly do you want me to do? Distance yourself. Daniel was silent. Daniel Benson continued. You built this company from nothing. Don't risk everything for something temporary. Daniel's voice remained calm. What makes you think it's temporary? Benson paused. Because people like us don't change our lives for emotional reasons. Daniel looked at Lily again. Maybe that's the problem. Sounded impatient. We'll discuss this tomorrow. The call ended. Daniel returned to Emma and Lily. Everything okay? Emma asked. Yes, but she could see the tension behind his eyes. Back at the apartment, Lily insisted on showing Daniel a new puzzle she had received from school. Pieces scattered across the living room floor while Emma prepared dinner again. You're very quiet, she said to Daniel, just thinking. Emma leaned against the kitchen counter. About the board. Yes. What did they say? Daniel placed another puzzle piece carefully. They think this is a distraction. Emma sighed. They might not be completely wrong. Daniel looked up. You think Lily is a distraction? Emma shook her head quickly. No. I think life is complicated. Daniel smiled faintly. That's an understatement. Lily finished the puzzle and clapped proudly. Don't, Daniel applauded. Impressive work. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep again, Emma and Daniel sat on the small balcony outside the apartment. The city lights stretched endlessly in the distance. Emma spoke quietly. You know they might eventually force you to choose. Daniel leaned on the railing. Yes, and if that happens? Daniel looked at the skyline. For years he had believed that power meant control. But control had never given him a moment like the ones he shared with Lily. If that happens, he said slowly, then I'll make a choice. Emma studied his face. And which one will you choose? Daniel turned toward her. The one that feels like a life. Emma didn't respond, but the silence between them felt warmer than before. Inside the apartment, Lily slept peacefully. Outside, the city continued its restless movement. And somewhere deep within Daniel Hartwell's carefully constructed world, something fundamental was beginning to shift. Not because of strategy, not because of ambition, but because a little girl had once asked him a simple question on a park bench, and he had answered yes. Morning sunlight slipped through the curtains of Emma's apartment, filling the small living room with a soft glow. The city outside was already awake, cars moving along the streets and distant voices drifting upward between buildings. Inside, the apartment still carried the quiet warmth of the night before. Daniel woke earlier than usual. He had stayed later than he planned, sitting on the balcony long after Emma had gone to bed, thinking about the conversation with Benson and the tension building inside the company he had spent his life creating. For years, every decision Daniel Hartwell made was measured carefully. Nothing happened without planning, without strategy. Yet somehow, the most important part of his life now had begun without any of those things. It had begun with a 5-year-old girl asking him a question. Daniel stepped quietly into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. The apartment felt smaller than the spaces he was used to, but the simplicity of it had begun to feel comforting rather than strange. He heard small footsteps behind him. "Daddy?" Daniel turned. Lily stood in the hallway rubbing her eyes, her hair messy from sleep and her dinosaur pajamas slightly twisted. "Good morning," Daniel said softly. Lily walked straight to him and wrapped her arms around his waist in a sleepy hug. "You stayed," she murmured. Daniel smiled. "Yes." Emma appeared a moment later, tying her hair back. "I see you survived the couch," she said. Daniel shrugged lightly. "I've slept in worse places." Emma laughed quietly and began making breakfast. Lily climbed onto a kitchen chair and watched Daniel carefully. "You're coming to school today?" she asked. Daniel considered his schedule. "I have meetings," he said. Lily's shoulders dropped slightly. "But," Daniel added, "I'll be there after school." Her face lit up instantly. "Okay." Emma glanced at him from the stove. "You're getting very good at negotiations." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm learning from the best." After breakfast, Lily grabbed her backpack and bounced toward the door. Daniel and Emma walked her to the school together. Parents and children moved along the sidewalks in familiar morning routines. Some greeted Emma with friendly nods, others glanced curiously at Daniel, clearly recognizing him from the news articles that had been circulating. One father whispered something to another parent as Daniel passed. Daniel ignored it. Lily didn't notice at all. School gate, she turned to Daniel. "Promise you'll come later?" "I promise." She hugged him quickly before running inside. Emma watched her disappear through the doors. "She believes you completely," Emma said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I know." Emma studied him for a moment. "That kind of trust is powerful." Daniel looked toward the school building. "So is the responsibility." They stood there for a moment before Daniel's phone buzzed. "Rachel again." Daniel answered. "Yes?" "Mr. Hartwell, the board moved the meeting earlier," she said. "They want you here within 30 minutes. Daniel sighed softly. "I'm on my way." He turned to Emma. "Duty calls." Emma smiled slightly. "Go run your empire." Daniel walked back toward the street, where Marcus waited with the car. The ride across the city felt heavier today. Marcus glanced at him through the mirror. "Board meeting again, sir." "Yes." "Those never look fun." Daniel chuckled quietly. "That's because they aren't." Hartwell Systems headquarters stood tall above the financial district, its glass exterior reflecting the bright morning sky. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere felt colder than usual. Benson and several other board members were already seated. "Daniel," Benson said immediately, "we need to address this situation." Daniel sat down calmly. "Which situation?" "You know exactly which one." A tablet was pushed across the table toward him. Another article. Another photo of him walking Lily home from school. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO spends increasing time with mystery family." Daniel placed the tablet down without reacting. "Is that all?" Benson leaned forward. This isn't a game. Investors are asking if your priorities are shifting. Daniel folded his hands on the table. My priorities are exactly where they should be. Then explain the headlines. Daniel looked around the room. For the past decade, I've delivered record growth every quarter. This company has expanded globally under my leadership. That's true, Benson admitted. Then perhaps my personal life does not require your approval. The room fell silent. One board member cleared his throat. No one is questioning your success, Daniel. But public perception matters. Daniel leaned back slightly. So does perspective. What does that mean? It means, Daniel said calmly, that attending a child's school events does not weaken my ability to lead. Another board member spoke carefully, unless emotions begin influencing decisions. Daniel met his gaze directly. Perhaps emotions can improve them. Benson sighed. You've changed. Daniel stood. No. I've simply noticed something I ignored for a long time. And what's that? Daniel walked toward the door. That success isn't measured only in numbers. He left the room before anyone could respond. Rachel met him outside. That looked intense. Daniel smiled faintly. They're worried. Are they right to be? Daniel thought about Lily waiting for him after school. No. Rachel nodded. Well, if it helps, the employees are rooting for you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. They are. Yes, Rachel said with a grin. Turns out people like seeing their billionaire boss act like a human being. Daniel laughed quietly. Good to know. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Meetings, calls, documents. But when the clock reached 3 o'clock, Daniel closed his laptop and stood. Rachel noticed immediately. School time. Daniel nodded. Marcus was waiting outside again. Brookside Elementary buzzed with energy as children poured out of the building. Lily spotted Daniel instantly.
Daddy!
She ran straight toward him again, arms wide. Daniel lifted her easily this time. How was school?
We learned about space.
Space? Did you know Jupiter is very big? Daniel pretended to think. I've heard rumors. Emma approached, smiling. She's been talking about planets all day. Lily grabbed Daniel's hand.
Come see my project.
They walked to a small display board near the school entrance, where children's drawings of planets covered the wall. Lily pointed proudly at one with purple rings. That's Saturn. Daniel studied it seriously. I think NASA should hire you. Lily giggled. As they left the school, Emma glanced at Daniel. How was the board meeting? Predictable. They're still worried. Yes. Emma sighed. I'm sorry this is causing problems. Daniel shook his head. It's not your fault. Lily skipped ahead along the sidewalk again. I'm hungry, she announced. Emma laughed. That never changes. Daniel gestured toward a small cafe nearby. Dinner. Emma hesitated. You don't have to keep doing this. Daniel looked at her calmly. I want to. They entered the cafe and found a small table near the window. Lily ordered spaghetti with dramatic enthusiasm. While they waited, Emma watched Daniel carefully. You're very determined. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I usually am. But this isn't business, Emma said. Numb. Then why fight so hard? Daniel looked at Lily coloring the paper menu. Because some things are worth protecting. Emma didn't respond, but the meaning settled quietly between them. Dinner passed with laughter and stories about Lily's school day. When they walked back to the apartment later, the evening air had grown cooler. Lily held both their hands as they crossed the street, a simple gesture. But for Daniel, it felt like something extraordinary. Back inside the apartment, Lily changed into her pajamas and climbed onto the couch between them again. Cartoons played softly on the television. After a while, her eyes began to close. Daniel carried her to bed once more. This time, she wrapped her arms around his neck before he could step away. Daddy, she whispered. Good night, Lily. He gently pulled the blanket over her. When he returned to the living room, Emma stood near the window. She's going to remember this time forever, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. I hope so. Emma turned toward him. Daniel, if this becomes permanent, everything in your life changes. Daniel walked to the balcony again and looked out at the city lights. Maybe it's supposed to. Emma stepped beside him. You're not afraid. Daniel thought about the empire he had built. The boardrooms, the headlines. He thought about Lily's small voice calling him Daddy. No, he said softly. For the first time in a long time, I'm not. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Daniel still spent his mornings surrounded by contracts, negotiations, and executives who measured success in numbers that filled entire screens. But every afternoon, almost without exception, he found himself walking the familiar 2 blocks toward Brookside Elementary. At first it had been a promise. Then it had become a habit. Now it was something else entirely. That afternoon the playground buzzed with the usual chaos of children racing toward freedom after a long school day. The bell had barely stopped ringing when Lily appeared in the crowd, scanning the gate with the focused determination of someone searching for something important. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. Daddy! Daniel barely had time to brace himself before she ran into him, her backpack bouncing behind her like a small parachute. Hello, Lily. You're early again, she said proudly. Daniel checked his watch. 2 minutes. Emma approached behind her, shaking her head with a smile. You know you're setting an unrealistic standard for fathers everywhere. Daniel laughed quietly. I didn't realize there was competition. There isn't, Emma said. Most of them are still stuck in traffic. They began walking down the sidewalk together. Lily held Daniel's hand again, swinging it dramatically with each step. We had a spelling test today, she announced. And, Daniel asked. I got all the words right. Emma looked impressed. That's true. She practiced all night. Daniel nodded seriously. I'm proud of you. Lily grinned. Because you helped. Emma glanced at Daniel. You've created a monster. Now she expects homework assistance every evening. Daniel shrugged lightly. I'm good with spelling. They reached the small park where Lily insisted on stopping almost every day. Today the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh grass and distant traffic. Lily immediately ran toward the climbing structure. Daniel and Emma sat on the bench nearby. You know, Emma said after a moment, the other parents have started asking questions. Daniel turned slightly. What kind of questions? The obvious ones, she said. Who you are. Why you're here. Daniel nodded. And what do you tell them? Emma smiled faintly. That you're Lily's dad. Daniel didn't respond right away. The word still carried weight every time he heard it, but it no longer felt strange. Across the park, Lily climbed to the top of the structure and waved.
Look how high I am!
Daniel stood immediately. Careful. Emma laughed. You worry about her like you've known her forever. Daniel watched Lily carefully. Maybe I should have. Emma studied him quietly. You're serious about this, aren't you? Daniel sat again. Yes. Emma folded her arms. You know this isn't a temporary situation anymore. I know. And the board. Daniel sighed softly. They're still unhappy. Emma nodded. They'll push harder. I expect them to. Emma looked toward the playground. You could still walk away before things get complicated. Daniel turned to her. Is that what you want? Emma hesitated. No. Daniel smiled slightly. Then neither do I. Moment Lily ran back toward them.
Push me on the swing again!
Daniel stood. That seems to be my official responsibility. Emma watched him walk toward the swings again. There was something reassuring about the way he moved with Lily. No hesitation, no awkwardness. Just presence. After several minutes of laughter and exaggerated swings, the sun began to lower toward the horizon. "We should go home," Emma called. Lily hopped off the swing. "Okay." They walked together toward the apartment building again. Halfway there, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Rachel." "Excuse me," he said, stepping slightly aside.
Yes, master?
"Hartwell," Rachel said carefully. "The board has scheduled an emergency press conference tomorrow." Daniel frowned. "About what?" "They're concerned about public perception again." Daniel sighed. "I'll handle it." "Are you sure?" "Yes." He ended the call and returned to Emma and Lily. Emma noticed his expression. More board trouble. Something like that. Lily tugged his sleeve. "Can we have pizza tonight?" Emma laughed. "That's very convenient timing." Daniel nodded. "I support the pizza proposal." "Of course you do," Emma said. Inside the apartment, the familiar routine unfolded again. Shoes kicked off near the door. Backpacks dropped onto chairs. Lily spreading crayons across the table, while Emma ordered pizza from the nearby restaurant. Daniel sat beside Lily while she worked on another drawing. "What are you making this time?" he asked. "A spaceship," Lily said. "With astronauts." "Yes." Daniel picked up a blue crayon. "I believe spaceships also require engineers." Lily nodded seriously. "You can be the engineer." Emma watched them from the kitchen. For the 100th time, the scene felt both beautiful and terrifying, because she knew how fragile happiness could be. Dinner arrived, and the three of them ate together while Lily told a long story about aliens visiting her classroom. Daniel listened with genuine interest. Emma noticed. "You're very good at pretending that story makes sense," she teased. Daniel shrugged. "I've heard stranger things in boardrooms." After dinner, Lily curled up on the couch between them again. Cartoons flickered across the screen. Eventually her eyes began to close. Daniel carried her to bed once more. This time she didn't wake at all. When he returned to the living room, Emma sat quietly near the window. "You're going to that press conference tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes." "They'll probably ask about us." "I assume they will." Emma crossed her arms. "You don't have to defend anything." Daniel looked at her. "I know." "But," Daniel stepped onto the balcony again. "But sometimes the truth deserves to be said out loud." Emma joined him outside. City stretched endlessly beneath them, lights glowing in thousands of windows. "So what will you tell them?" she asked. Daniel leaned against the railing. "The truth." "And what is that?" Daniel looked toward the sky for a moment before answering. "That a small girl asked me to show up." Emma waited, and that I did. The next morning, the press conference drew more attention than anyone expected. Cameras filled the large conference hall at Hartwell Systems headquarters. Reporters from financial networks and major newspapers lined the room. Daniel stepped to the podium calmly. Flashes from cameras lit the room repeatedly. A reporter spoke first. "Mr. Hartwell, recent media reports show you spending significant time with a woman and child outside your company responsibilities. Can you explain the relationship?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." The room grew quiet. "A few months ago," he began, "a little girl asked me if I could attend her school performance." Reporters exchanged glances. "She didn't ask about my company." Daniel continued. "She didn't ask about money. She asked if someone would clap for her." The cameras continued flashing. "So I went." A reporter raised a hand. "And now?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Now I still go." Another reporter spoke. "Does this mean you're stepping away from leadership at Hartwell Systems?" Daniel shook his head. "No. So your priorities haven't changed." Daniel paused for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "They've expanded." The room fell silent again. "For years," Daniel said calmly, I believed success was measured by growth, profit, and influence. Those things matter, but they aren't everything. The reporters listened closely. Sometimes, Daniel finished. Success is simply being there when someone needs you. He stepped away from the podium before any further questions could follow. Inside the building, Benson watched the broadcast from a television in his office. He shook his head slowly. "Daniel," he muttered. Meanwhile, across the city, Emma sat at her kitchen table, watching the same broadcast. Lily stood beside her holding a spoon full of cereal. Lily said proudly. Emma smiled softly. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." The press conference spread across the internet faster than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, Daniel's words were everywhere. News channels replayed the clip again and again, analysts debating whether the billionaire CEO had just made the most unusual public statement in corporate history. Inside Hartwell Systems, the atmosphere felt strangely divided. Some executives walked through the halls with tight expressions, clearly worried about investor reactions. Others looked quietly amused, as if the whole situation had introduced something refreshingly human into the sterile world of finance. Rachel stepped into Daniel's office with her tablet. "Well," she said, placing it on his desk, "you've officially broken the internet." Daniel glanced at the screen. Headlines scrolled endlessly. Billionaire CEO defends father role. Hartwell chooses family values. Unexpected side of corporate leader goes viral. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Are investors panicking? Rachel shook her head. Surprisingly, no. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Actually," she continued, "some of them are praising you." "For what?" "For sounding like a normal human being." Daniel chuckled quietly. "That's reassuring." Rachel studied him for a moment. "You meant every word, didn't you?" "Yes," Rachel nodded slowly. "Good." Across the city, Lily's school day had just ended. The playground buzzed with its usual energy. Children racing toward parents waiting at the gates. Lily stood near the fence scanning the street. When she saw Daniel walking toward the school again, she jumped excitedly.
He's here!
The teacher beside her smiled. "You're very lucky, Lily." "I know," Lily said proudly. Daniel reached the gate just as the bell finished ringing. "Hello, Lily." She ran straight into his arms again.
Daddy, you were on TV!
Daniel laughed softly. "So I've heard." Emma approached from the sidewalk. "I guess privacy is officially over." Daniel shrugged lightly. "It was probably unrealistic anyway." Emma studied his face. "Are you okay with all this attention?" Daniel looked down at Lily holding his hand. "Yes." They began walking toward the park again. Several parents nearby whispered quietly as they passed. One father nodded respectfully. "Good speech this morning," he said. Daniel nodded back politely. Lily looked confused. "Why are people talking about you?" "Because yours dad said something important." Lily considered that. "About clapping?" Daniel laughed. "Exactly." Reached the park where Lily immediately ran toward the swings again. Daniel sat beside Emma on the bench. "You're becoming famous at an elementary school," Emma said. Daniel leaned back. "That might be the most intimidating audience I've faced." Emma laughed quietly. For a moment they watched Lily playing in the distance. Then Emma spoke again. "You know, that speech changed something." Daniel turned slightly.
How so?
"People saw you differently," she said. "Not just as a billionaire." Daniel considered that. "Maybe that's a good thing." Emma nodded. "It is." At that moment, Lily ran toward them again, holding a small flower she had picked from the grass. "For you," she said, handing it to Daniel. "Thank you." She climbed onto the bench beside him. "Are you famous now?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Maybe a little." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That's okay." "Why? Because you still come to school." Emma laughed softly. "Well said. The afternoon passed with the familiar routine of swings, laughter, and simple conversation. Eventually, they returned to the apartment as the sun began setting again. Inside, Lily spread her crayons across the table once more. "I'm drawing another picture," she announced. Daniel sat beside her. "What is it this time?" "A big house." Emma glanced over from the kitchen. "We live in a small apartment, remember?" Lily shook her head confidently. "This is our future house." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious." Lily nodded seriously. "And it has a big garden." Emma smiled. "Part I approve of." They spent the evening together as usual. Dinner, homework, stories, and eventually bedtime. When Daniel carried Lily to her room that night, she wrapped her arms around his neck again. "Daddy."
Yes?
"You're not going away, right?" Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "No," he said gently. "I'm not." She smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. When Daniel stepped back into the living room, Emma was standing near the doorway. "She asks that question sometimes," Emma said quietly. "I understand why." Emma leaned against the wall. Her father used to promise he'd come back. Daniel didn't say anything. "And eventually she stopped asking," Emma added. Daniel nodded slowly. "I won't make promises I can't keep." Emma studied him carefully. "Do you really think you can balance both worlds?" Daniel stepped onto the balcony again. "I'm starting to think the worlds don't have to be separate." Emma followed him outside. "You mean bringing Lily into your life completely?" "Yes." Emma looked down at the street far below. "That would change everything." Daniel nodded. "Maybe it should." Emma hesitated before speaking again. "You know she'll start calling you Dad everywhere soon." Daniel smiled faintly. "She already does." Emma laughed softly. "That's true." The night air moved gently around them. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Emma said something quietly. "She needs someone who stays." Daniel looked at the city lights stretching across the skyline. "I know." Inside the apartment, Lily slept peacefully again. And somewhere across the city, inside the towering headquarters of Hartwell Systems, the board of directors was gathering for another late night meeting. Benson sat at the head of the table. "Public reaction is surprisingly positive," one executive said. "Yes," another agreed. "The speech actually improved our reputation." Benson folded his hands thoughtfully. "So he turned a personal distraction into good publicity." Another board member leaned forward. "The bigger question is whether he intends to make this permanent." Benson stared at the reports on the table. "He already has." Across the city, Daniel stood on Emma's balcony again. "You know," Emma said quietly, "Lily has a school festival next month." Talent toward her. "A festival?" "Yes." "Parents volunteer to help organize games." Daniel smiled. "That sounds dangerous." Emma laughed. "You volunteering?" Daniel considered it for a moment. "Yes." Emma looked surprised. "You're serious?" Daniel nodded. "I am." Emma shook her head with amusement. From billionaire CEO to carnival volunteer, Daniel leaned against the railing. "Life takes unexpected turns." Emma smiled softly. "That it does." Inside the bedroom, Lily rolled over in her sleep, hugging her small dinosaur toy. Outside, the city continued its endless movement. But for Daniel Hartwell, the most important part of his world had become something small, simple, and unexpectedly powerful. A little girl, a small apartment, and a life that no longer felt empty. The following weeks passed with a steady rhythm that Daniel had never known before. His life had always been filled with motion, flights between countries, negotiations with executives, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. Now, strangely, the most important moments of his days happened in places that once would have seemed insignificant. A small classroom, a park bench, a kitchen table scattered with crayons. That morning, Daniel arrived at Brookside Elementary earlier than usual. The school festival Emma had mentioned was finally happening, and the entire playground had been transformed into a lively collection of colorful booths and decorations. Bright banners hung between trees. Children ran from game to game with excitement. Parents moved around carrying trays of snacks and balloons. Daniel stood near the entrance for a moment, observing the scene. In boardrooms, he was always the person in control, the one giving instructions. Here, he was simply another volunteer. Emma approached from the refreshment table, wiping her hands on a small towel. "I wasn't sure you'd survive the planning committee," she teased. Daniel smiled slightly. It was surprisingly intense. Emma laughed. Elementary school parents can be very competitive. Lily suddenly appeared between them wearing a paper crown decorated with glitter stars.
Daddy, look.
Daniel crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "That crown looks very official." "I helped make it," Lily said proudly. "And I'm running the ring toss game." Emma shook her head. "She's been practicing all week." Daniel stood and looked toward the small booth where several colorful rings were stacked beside wooden pegs. "Then, I should probably test the game." Lily grabbed his hand immediately and pulled him toward the booth. "Okay, you only get 3 tries." Several children gathered around as Daniel picked up the first ring. Pegs stood only a few feet away. "This looks easy," Daniel said. Lily crossed her arms confidently. "It's not." Daniel tossed the ring. It bounced off the peg and rolled away. Lily giggled. "See." Daniel picked up another ring. This time it landed perfectly around the peg. The children nearby cheered. Lily clapped loudly.
He won.
Emma watched from the side, smiling quietly. It was strange seeing Daniel Hartwell, the man who negotiated $1 billion contracts without blinking, celebrating a simple ring toss like a victory, but somehow it suited him. Later that afternoon, while Lily ran between games with her friends, Emma and Daniel stood near the lemonade stand watching the festival unfold. "You're surprisingly good at this," Emma said. Daniel looked confused. At what? Being part of a normal day. Daniel thought about that. For a long time I didn't realize how abnormal my life had become. Emma nodded. "Success can do that." Daniel watched Lily laughing with another child near the bounce house. "Sometimes success builds walls," he said quietly. Emma glanced at him. "And now," Daniel smiled faintly, "now I'm learning how to climb over them." The festival continued for hours. Parents chatted. Teachers organized games. Children ran across the playground with endless energy. By late afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, and the crowd began to thin. Lily ran toward Daniel again, holding a small stuffed toy she had won from one of the booths.
"Look what I got!"
Daniel examined the small plush dinosaur. "That looks fierce." "It's my prize." Emma gathered the leftover decorations from the table. "You had fun today?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Best day ever." Daniel laughed softly. "You say that often. Because lots of days are the best." Emma looked at Daniel with quiet understanding. Children had a way of measuring happiness differently. As they began walking back toward the apartment, parents passed them on the sidewalk. One of them recognized Daniel immediately. "Mr. Hartwell," the man said, "I saw your interview last week." Daniel nodded politely. "Thank you." The man smiled. "My daughter keeps talking about Lily's dad who helped run the games." Daniel glanced at Lily walking ahead. "I'm glad she enjoyed it." The man shook Daniel's hand before continuing down the street. Emma watched the interaction. "You're becoming a local celebrity," Daniel sighed. "I hope not." Emma laughed. "It's too late." Back at the apartment, Lily immediately spread her newest drawings across the table again. This time there were several pictures. A playground, a crown, 3 stick figures holding hands again. Daniel studied them carefully. "You've improved your art skills." Lily smiled proudly. "I practice." Emma leaned against the kitchen counter. She's also practicing spelling again. Daniel looked at Lily. Let's see. Lily grabbed a crayon and carefully wrote several words across the page. Mom, Lily, Dad. Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest again. Emma noticed, but she didn't interrupt. After dinner, Lily curled up beside Daniel on the couch again while Emma cleaned the kitchen. Can we read a story? Lily asked. Daniel picked up a small picture book from the shelf. Of course. As he began reading, Lily leaned against his shoulder, listening quietly. Emma paused in the doorway watching them. Moments like this still felt fragile to her. Happiness that arrived suddenly could disappear just as quickly. But every day Daniel remained. Every day he showed up. Eventually Lily's eyes began to close again. Daniel carried her to bed and tucked the blanket around her carefully. When he returned to the living room, Emma sat near the window. She trusts you completely now, Emma said softly. Daniel sat across from her. I know. Emma folded her hands. And that means something important. Daniel waited. If you ever decide to leave, it will break her heart. Daniel looked down at the drawings on the table. I'm not planning to leave, Emma nodded slowly. But life changes. Daniel stood and walked to the balcony again. I've been thinking about that. Emma followed him outside. About what? About change. Emma waited. Daniel looked out across the glowing skyline. For years I believed my company was the most important thing I would ever build. Emma glanced at him. And now, Daniel smiled slightly. Now I think I might be building something better. Emma felt something warm settle in her chest, 'cause for the first time, the future didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a possibility. Inside the bedroom, Lily slept peacefully once again. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly across the night. And Daniel Hartwell, the billionaire who once believed success meant standing alone at the top, was finally discovering the quiet power of not being alone at all. The following morning arrived with a calmness that Daniel had not known for most of his adult life. For years, every morning had begun with urgency. Emails waiting, meetings scheduled before sunrise, decisions that could change entire markets. Now there was something else mixed into that rhythm. Anticipation. Daniel stood near the large windows of his penthouse apartment, looking out over the city skyline. The buildings were beginning to glow under the early light of morning, cars slowly filling the streets below. But his thoughts were not on the city. They were on a small apartment across town, where a little girl was probably just waking up and deciding what color crayons she would use that day. Daniel glanced at the framed drawings on his desk. The first one Lily had given him. The second with the 3 figures under a tree. The one with the house labeled My Family. For most people, those drawings would be simple children's art. For Daniel, had become something much bigger. His phone buzzed quietly. Rachel again, he answered. Good morning. Good morning, Hartwell, Rachel said. I wanted to update you on the board meeting yesterday. Daniel walked toward the kitchen. And there's less resistance now, she explained. Your interview changed public opinion more than anyone expected. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee. Investors like stability, Rachel continued. But they also like good stories. Daniel smiled faintly. So this became a good story. A yes? There was a pause before she added something else. Also, the company charity department received a lot of messages. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What kind of messages? Parents thanking you for supporting family time. Daniel leaned against the counter. That's unexpected. Rachel laughed softly. Not really. Most people wish their bosses believed that too. Daniel looked again at Lily's drawings. Well, he said quietly, maybe they should. After the call ended, Daniel finished his coffee and prepared to leave. Waited outside the building as usual. Where to today, sir? Marcus asked. Daniel adjusted his coat. Brookside Elementary. Marcus smiled slightly. Yes, sir. The school day had already begun when Daniel arrived, but Emma had texted earlier asking if he could meet them for lunch. The small diner across from the school looked exactly the same as it had the day Lily first pointed it out through the window. Inside, sat at a corner table while Lily colored another drawing. The moment Lily saw Daniel through the window, she jumped out of her chair.
Daddy!
As she ran across the diner floor and nearly collided with him. Daniel lifted her easily. Hello again. You came early, she said. I had time. Emma watched them from the table with a quiet smile. You're setting a dangerous precedent, she said as Daniel sat down. How so? She's going to expect you every day. Daniel shrugged. That doesn't sound so terrible. Lily pushed the drawing toward him. Look. Daniel examined the page. This time it showed a park bench under a tree. 3 figures sat together. One small, one tall, one with long hair. Daniel looked at Lily. This looks familiar. That's the place where we met, Lily said proudly. Emma glanced at the drawing. You remember that day clearly? Lily nodded, 'cause it was important. Daniel felt the same quiet weight in his chest again. Yes, it had been important. Lunch passed with the same comfortable rhythm they had developed over the past months. Lily talking endlessly. Emma occasionally laughing. Daniel listening more than he ever had in any boardroom conversation. Eventually Emma checked the time. I should get her back to class. Lily sighed dramatically. School again. Daniel stood. Education is important. Lily considered that. Okay. Outside the diner, Lily hugged Daniel again before walking back toward the school gate with Emma. Halfway there she turned back. Daddy. Yes. Will you still come later? Daniel nodded. Always. She smiled and ran inside. Emma lingered near the gate. You know, she said quietly. She believes you completely. Daniel leaned slightly against the fence. I know. Emma studied him. You've become very important to her. Daniel nodded. She's become very important to me too. Emma looked down for a moment before speaking again. I used to think stability meant protecting her from disappointment. Daniel waited. But now I think stability might mean letting her trust someone who stays. Daniel met her eyes. I plan to stay. Emma smiled softly. That's what I hoped you'd say. Later that evening, as the sun began to fade behind the buildings again, Daniel returned to the park where everything had started. The same fountain sprayed water into the air. The same bench waited beneath the trees. Lily ran ahead of them toward the stones near the edge of the fountain.
I can still jump across!
Daniel watched her carefully. Careful. Emma sat beside him on the bench. You remember what she said to you that first day? Daniel nodded. She asked if I was busy. Emma laughed quietly. And you weren't. Daniel looked toward the place where Lily had first walked up to him. It was the first time in years that I had nothing planned. Emma leaned back against the bench. Funny how the most important moments happen like that. Lily ran back toward them again.
I did it again!
Daniel clapped. Excellent work. She climbed onto the bench between them and leaned against his shoulder.
Daddy! Yes. Are you happy?
Daniel paused. For most of his life, that question had never even been part of his thinking. Success, growth, power, those had been the measurements. But happiness, that was something different. Daniel looked down at Lily sitting beside him, then at Emma watching them quietly. Yes, he said gently, I am. Lily smiled and rested her head against his arm. Emma looked toward the sunset glowing across the park. And in that quiet moment, everything that had once seemed complicated suddenly felt simple. 'Cause the billionaire who had spent his life building an empire had finally discovered something far more valuable than success. He had discovered a family.